If you've been into high-end audio for a while, what would you go back and tell your newbie self if you possibly could? What wisdom have you gained that you would love to just impart on yourself and maybe have made your life easier if you could? This is something I've been thinking about lately as I start to reflect on how my objectives are changing and how the future of my audiophile journey might be, what kinds of things I would do now that I can apply more than a couple of decades in the hobby to what I would like to accomplish going forward. Now, if you're new in the hobby, you might find this video interesting, but also if you've been at this for a while, I'm sure you'll be amused to hear what my list is and probably be formulating your own ideas about what you'd like to go back and tell yourself. So with that said, here are the 5 main things that I would go back and tell my newbie self if I possibly could. I'm not sure how critical the order of these is, but nevertheless, starting with number 5 on the list of things I would go back and tell myself, there's no real lifetime system in the way that I thought that there would be. Let me explain. When I first started out, I was a young guy in my sort of late teens, early 20s. I started really getting into listening to music, just sitting and listening to music as one would sit down and watch a movie, only with music, right? I think for most people, that's a novelty that most people don't do. But if the YouTube algorithm is doing what it's supposed to, then you're probably somebody who's also into just sitting and listening to music. And once I started really getting into that, I got into my early 20s and I decided that clearly this was an important enough hobby to me that I decided I wanted to just invest in a really good setup that I would never really be inclined to change. I just wanted to get some really, really good components and put together a really nice system that would be one less thing I ever had to worry about in life, really good stuff that could just follow me wherever I went in life. And I would never feel the need to be upgrading or reaching into my pocket. I just wanted to buy once and cry once, as the saying goes. So that's not really the way things end up happening, I think, for the vast majority of us. So that's why I would go back and tell myself the lifetime system, it's not what you think. Instead of lifetime components, it's really going to be better to put together a system that is a lifetime value by doing savvy shopping and trying to pick components that are likely to hold their value and remain compelling to people over the years who might want to buy them. That way, by having a lifetime value in the system rather than just keeping the same component forever, as your living situation changes and as your listening objectives changes, maybe as your musical tastes change over the years, you can trade gear out without having to cost yourself lots of additional money and experiencing the financial strain of the high-end audio hobby. I think that's really the better way to do it. So, just as an example, the turntable I bought all those years ago, I still have it, but I'm not sure if I will keep it in the future. And hey, 22, 23 years of owning that thing, that's a pretty darn good run. So, if I decide to get rid of it, I might let it go. But the point of it is, that is a turntable that was already in production for a long time when I bought it a couple of decades ago, and it's still in production. It's a Michel Gyro SE. They're terrific turntables. They may not sell in humongous volumes because they're not the cheapest things ever, but people still love them. People still enjoy them. They still hold a lot of value. You can still go out and buy one today, and man, are they not at all cheap. Wasn't cheap when I bought over a couple decades ago. And when I bought mine, I bought it used. Well, now, because you can still get them and because they're still relatively popular and very much well respected and so much more expensive to buy new now, the used values have still stayed really good to the point that I could now sell that turntable for a profit compared to what I bought it for all those years ago. And that really can make up for the inflation that has happened over the years. And it can also make up for some other components that are only going to depreciate. For example, digital components. Digital audio moves too quickly in terms of technology. So yesterday's $2,000 DA converter is today's $500 DA converter or less. And as that technology progresses, probably those things are not going to hold their value really well. So if you can pick out the components that are likely to remain sought after, and especially if you're a savvy shopper and you're buying used for a good price and not losing money on depreciation, you can kind of defer the hit that you're going to take against those components that are certain not to hold their value. And so that's what I mean when I say there's no real lifetime system component. You're going to need to change, but ideally, if you do your shopping right and you make good choices, you can pick things that you can swap out when the time comes. So that really is the first thing that I would go back and tell myself, is just do your shopping really wisely. And for the most part, I feel like I actually did a good job on that anyway, but I probably would have made some different choices over the years if I had known that on the front end and really fully appreciated that. Now, moving on in my list, number 4 on the list of things that I would go back and tell my newbie self: what your heart wants isn't always what you actually need. And I say that because it's really easy to romanticize certain types of equipment and certain types of sonic delivery. Sometimes we love the idea of things, but having them and living with them are two different things. Sometimes the sound that you enjoy is not the practical thing to own and maintain and live with. Let's take, for example, tube amps. I love tube amps. I'm a huge fan of tube gear. I've had a number of different tube amps over the years and tried a lot of different tube equipment, and I'm a big fan of the sonic characteristics of tubes. I generally have preferred it to most solid state things. But I'm starting to have to let go of that a little bit, because now I'm to a point where I have looked back and realized I don't know that I've used that equipment as much as I really would have liked to, and it's really for a lot of boring logistical reasons. Tube amps need to warm up. They do not sound right for the first half an hour or so that they're switched on, sometimes 45 minutes or more, depending on the piece of equipment. And there have been plenty of times over the years where I have thought, gee, I'd love to sit down for a listening session. That would really relax me. I could really use that. And maybe I had some limited time and I just wanted to go and catch a side of vinyl or two and be done with it and move on with my day. But I haven't done it because of the barrier to access that was involved in, well, I want to go and listen right now. I don't want to have to schedule my listening session in advance and go and switch the tube amps on and then come back in a half an hour and actually do my listening. It was just impractical for me. And so what would happen was, instead of catching a quick listening session, I wouldn't listen. I would just move on with my day knowing that that wasn't practical. And if I couldn't do it now, then it just wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to have time. There were other things that I needed to accomplish. So as I think forward, I might have to let something like that go. It's likely that there are solid state options out there that would get me some of the tube flavor that I like so much, but would also allow me to have instant access, instant gratification, and be able to catch that quick listening session when it pops in my head or when I have this little bubble of time to do so. And I think that would be much more valuable for me than just having that thing that my heart loves, the sound of tubes, right? What good is that if you're not going to listen to it as much as you would like? So that's what I mean when I say what your heart wants isn't always what you need. Same could be true for vinyl. Maybe you love playing records, you like the whole performance of dusting them off and queuing up the stylus and that whole tactile experience. But at the same time, if you're limited on time, or if you're just somebody who maybe feels like doing those things also takes a little bit of energy out of you that you'd rather put into just listening and trying to relax. Maybe it's fun as an idea, but in actuality, it just is a barrier to access. Then maybe it's not serving you as well as your heart reckons it should. So it makes your heart happy, but if you're not going to use it as much because of these little barriers, it's probably not what you need, at least not all the time. And that would change your priorities in your audiophile life. Now, moving on to number 3 on my list of things that I would tell my newbie self if I could. Speaker amp room synergy is the most important part of system building. Nothing else you do with your system is going to matter if you don't get all 3 of those things right and in balance with one another. So, when you pick a pair of speakers that you like, you need to get the amp matched up to those speakers, right? Those speakers are going to do you no good if they're not getting the type of power and current delivery that they need to work correctly mechanically. And those speakers also need to work with your room. I have learned the hard way over the years that you can't make a really huge pair of speakers work in a small room. No amount of acoustic treatment will really get you there. You can help you deal, but it's never going to sound right if you do that. And on the flip side of the token, too small a pair of speakers in a big room, that's not ever going to work for you either. And there's nothing else you're going to do in your system that's ever going to change that. And if you don't get those 3 things right, your amp and speaker pairing and your speaker and room pairing, if you don't get all those 3 things in balance, everything upstream in the system is not going to perform to its potential, period. Those are the 3 things that you need to get right above all else. It's more important to get those 3 things right than your source components. So that is definitely a hard lesson I have learned through the school of hard audiophile knocks over the years, and is something that I would tell myself. And I think that ties back to the whole concept of buying system components for life. As life changes and your living situation changes and your rooms change, that's going to change the speakers you have, and that's going to change the amps you have. So really, really, really important part of system building that really took me some time to learn and accept. So, probably I would have walked away from some really great deals on some interesting equipment that I bought if I had fully appreciated that I was never going to get the full potential out of that equipment based on the situation that I happened to be in at the time. So, moving on to number 2 on my list of things that I would go back and tell my younger audiophile self. All listening doesn't have to be critical listening all of the time. And not only that, it shouldn't be critical listening all of the time. You will just fry your ears and burn yourself out if you're doing that. Critical listening is work for your brain. It's the antithesis of relaxing and listening to music when you're doing that. And that's a very easy trap to fall into for audiophiles, and especially when you're getting into high-end audio. Listening is a really emotional thing at the end of the day. We have a lot of emotion wrapped up in it. And then when you add into just the emotion of consuming art, there's also the fact of the amount of effort and time that we spend in building our systems out. We're always very interested in different components and how things can be matched and balanced, and that takes a lot out of you. It's fun, but it also kind of takes a lot out of you. We also really get some real money invested into it, and that's another layer of emotion that we get wrapped up into. It's easy to spend a lot of money on some really great equipment and feel like you have to really be intently and critically listening to all of your music all the time just to sort of mentally justify the expense and the effort and the emotional toll of this hobby. But really, you're better off to try and listen passively as often as you can. And I would love to go back and tell myself, look, do the critical listening thing only when you're trying to evaluate components for your system and pick components. And once you've made your selection and you've got your system built out, you don't have to super duper intensely ruminate over how the snares are rattling in the snare drum in your song and how you can hear the air moving through the singer's throat and out their mouth and how the particular microphone they were singing into is affecting the timbre of their voice, and so on and so on and so forth. It's kind of like if you go to an art gallery to look at a painting, right? Do you stand back and look at the whole painting in totality, or do you walk right up to the painting so you're staring at it from an inch away so that you can see the individual weave of the canvas of that painting? That's no fun. Who wants to do that, right? But a lot of us in the audiophile and high-end audio hobby do exactly that, a little too much. And that's fine if you're the painter and you're trying to figure out if your painting job is fine. I would liken that to building your system, right? Or, if you're a musician and you're trying to figure out if your arrangement is good or so on. But I think for those of us who just want to enjoy listening to music, it's really important to try and be more passive with our listening and not over focus on micro and macro detail, and try and consume the totality of your music rather than intensely focus on certain things about it. And that's much easier to say than to do when you're really emotionally tied into audio reproduction and the whole hobby of it. So I think that's something really, really important to consider there. And moving on to my last thing that I would really love to go back and tell myself if I could. Number one, trust your ears. Trust your ears. It sounds simple, right? But it's not so easy a lot of times. And especially when you're newer at this thing. When you're relatively new in the hobby, you haven't necessarily developed your ear yet, and you're still learning what good sounds like to you. And good sound is a subjective thing. We all have slightly different ideas about what that is. And when you're newer, it's real easy to be led astray by the opinions and the advice of others. And I would say that you really need to be careful. And I would love to go back and tell myself, take the opinions and advice of others into account, but understand that all that really matters at the end of the day is what you think about what you're hearing, and to trust your ears. So if you are talking about equipment with people on the internet, maybe on a Facebook group or internet forum, or you're watching YouTube reviews about equipment, a lot of times there will be some popular and not so popular options among those groups, and it's easy to get wrapped up in that, but you might then audition that piece of equipment, and in your own room, with your own ears, in your own situation, and with your particular musical tastes, your ears might be telling you, hang on, this is not what I expected, and I'm not sure if this is working for me. But in the back of your mind, your brain is telling you, well, hang on, all these other people told you it was the best option for you. So you must be wrong. Your ears must be wrong. But maybe they aren't. In fact, probably your ears aren't wrong. And you really do need to be able to trust them a little bit. The flip side of the same token is true. Maybe some people led you to believe that a piece of equipment would be wrong for you and that you would not like what you're hearing. Or maybe you read the spec sheet and you went, gee, the numbers are all wrong. I don't think this is going to work for me. But if you auditioned it anyway, you might find that your toes are tapping and your ears are enjoying what they're hearing. Your heart is feeling happy with what you're hearing. Even though you thought, gee, maybe this wasn't going to work for you, you might find that it is. And you can trust your ears on that too. It's all part of the development of listening and the developing of a good ear and understanding what you like, not what other people say you should like, but what you actually like. So one of the most important things that I would tell my newbie self, and that I would tell anybody else who's newer in the hobby, is to start right away in in really developing your ear so that you can be able to trust your ears objectively above all else and above all the opinions that you are going to be experiencing as you get into the hobby. And I think the same needs to be considered for those of us who have now been at it a while and enjoy trying to advise and help other people who are getting into the hobbyist. We've got to remember too that their objectives are not always our objectives. So that's really what I have to say about that. Trust your ears. So that's really the main key ingredients that I would go back and tell myself if I could about how this hobby is actually going to go. I think that's way more important. These sort of theories and basics are much more important than I wouldn't just go back and tell myself, no, Brian, buy that component instead of that component. Stick with this brand instead of that one. Doesn't matter. That's part of trying those things out is part of the fun of the hobby. But these are really the 5 theories that I would go back and tell myself. So, what do you think about the list? If you're newer at this, did you find this interesting? Did you find it useful? And if you've been at the hobby a while, I'd also like to know, are these things that you learned the hard way? What would you add to the list? What would you go back and tell your newbie self if you possibly could hop in the Back to the Future DeLorean and go back in time and have a quick word with your newbie audiophile self? I'd love to hear what you have to say in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe. It's really, really helpful for small potato channels like mine. I appreciate each and every one of you who has taken the time to watch this video, and I will see you next time.